Good afternoon. Howdy. Aloha, bonjour, bienvenue. Welcome to A Beer with the Old Growler. I'm the Old Growler, Pete LaFrance. And here we are on, let's see what day it is. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Look down, look up. Okay. It is Tuesday, the 16th of June, 2020. And this is the 91st day that we have been sheltering in place. And this is growler number 62. Boy, we've gone all the way from number 1 to 62. And that has been quite a stretch, I tell you. We'll see just how far the old growler can last. All right, well, the reason I am here, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Those of you who know about me, well, welcome back. And for those of you who are just tuning in, you're just in time. It's 5 o'clock, and that's time for a beer with the old growler. And today, I was able to get over to the Henry Street Ale House. They are still in operation as far as selling growlers, and this is a rather large growler, but it's a growler. And so it's from Montauk Brewing Company. It is their Wave Catcher. And I believe it's around 6.5% alcohol by volume. And I'm not too sure whether they call it an ale or some other name for it, but we're going to try it out. Wet our whistle at 5 o'clock. Well, this is an enthusiastic pour, I got to admit. But that just shows how fresh it is, and it is out of a growler. So that's kind of an interesting concept. Boy, if it stays that carbonated in a growler, I just might have to. I do. I do have a tendency to finish this off, especially if it's tonight. In fact, a steak dinner, that would probably. I won't lie to you, I've had this before, and I'm just waiting for that head to go down so we can have ourselves a toast. And it's late. Oh, it's 5:02. Well, okay, for those of you who are here, welcome. For those of you who have just arrived, welcome. It's time for a sip with the old growler. Here we go. Well, not a sip, gulp. Oh, that was refreshing. I'll tell you. Yes, sir. That was. I'm not too sure what the hops and malt content is, because when I get the old growler here, I'm not tasting well. I am tasting the beer, but I'm drinking it, and there's a big difference between drinking and tasting. One you have to think about, the other you just enjoy. Although I do enjoy tasting, in fact, yes, I do. In fact, being able to take apart a beer, to deconstruct it, to figure out what went into it when you're not told, well, I suppose that's similar to someone who enjoys wine, being able to tell where that wine comes from, what side of the mountain. Oh, you can get quite carried away in this, and there's a good reason. I tell you, there is, because beer is a fascinating thing. It truly is. So many aspects, especially when you start asking why. Why does it look a certain way? Why does it taste a certain way? Why do we in society treat it a certain way? Well, that's why we're here. And that's why the old growler is here to chit chat about that. I'll tell you. Okay. Well, I want to show you one of the things the old growler has always done. And that is before the pause in place or the secure in place, before all this happened, before March 15th, 2020, on Thursdays, I used to get together for a video work. I would go over to the Henry Street Ale House, and I'd get together with Jerry Scott and my buddy Jim. And what we would do is we would taste 2 beers at least, sometimes 3. And it was called Meeting Expectations. And you can find all of those videos on the playlist that is called tastings at the Henry Street Ale House, and some of those are really good. In any event, this is kind of what we do. It was a pretty simple observation. What we would do is we would take a look at a beer, and this is what we're going to be tasting today. And we would look at it, and we would see. Let's see now. Do we have one around here? I used to have plenty of beer cans. You know what the heck? We take a look at a bottle like this, and first of all, it looks like a whiskey bottle. So you're going to say to yourself, "Boy, this is a high-class beer." And then you read the label, and it says Fuller's 1999 bottle conditioned vintage ale number 2, 26,825, alcohol 8.5% by volume. And on the back, there's a story about how it is one of the premier ales brewed in Britain by the Fuller's Company. So we'd take a look at that, and I'm sure we would be thoroughly impressed. In fact, we were thoroughly impressed because, and I will put the link below, we have tasted this. It was a gift from a friend, brewmaster Jamie Gerardo, and it was given to him by the fellow who actually brewed it. So it was quite a tasting. I found out about that after reading and after tasting the beer, so that made it an even more special event. So that is what we would do, and we would either give it a thumbs up, it meets expectations, or a thumbs down, it does not meet expectations. And for those of you who hang out after the beer tasting, I would like to chat with you. It's called My Life as a Professional Barfly. And essentially, what I do is I've let you in on some of the interesting places that I have been, some of the interesting people I've met, and some of the great bars that I've had occasion to visit, but also why they were important. I think that is really something. If you enjoy a good meal, why did you enjoy that good meal? I mean, you enjoy it, no problems, but afterwards, what did you learn from it? And that is an important thing about being a barfly. Being a professional barfly, a regular barfly, well, there you go, but a professional, and I will be. Always called a professional barfly, I do hope. Today, I'll be talking about how important bars are. And as we all know, they're closed right now. That, I think, is something to stop and think about. This is just how important bars are to this society. Right. As I said, we have a feature tasting today. And let's see if Randolph beer, a Saison, can meet expectations. Now, this is a little interesting because if for those of you who were here for, well, no, we yesterday was a bit of a technical problem. So this is the first time that you have seen the Randolph Crowler, Crowler. And what this is the brewery has a number of cans just like this. As you can see, it has a place to mark for what type of beer it is. And all of the labels are exactly the same. There are huge cases of these empty cans. And what they do is they go up to the tap and they fill it up, and then they put it on a condense, which there is they have a cap that fits right on top, compressed, it comes down, compresses the whole thing together, seals it, and if I'm not mistaken, it is also a counter pressure operation, which means it leaves the pressure in there so that the can is just like it would be a normal beer can. The thing is, you can't label, especially now, you can't label each one of them differently because it's kind of tough to do, especially if you're running a brew pub, or in this case, a brew pub, and they have limited capabilities for dispensing beer. So anyways, I'm not going to hold them in. I'm not going to read something off of the label here would be kind of ridiculous. There's absolutely nothing except for Saison. So I will have a cheat sheet on this one, if you'll pardon my fingers there. Okay, this is a Saison, and it's called R2-D2 Farmhouse Ale Saison, the Randolph beer, collaboration with Transmitter Brewing Company, also here in Brooklyn. 5.2% alcohol by volume, 23 international bittering units, so it's not going to be too bitter. Okay, what they say here is for Beer Week, we teamed up with Transmitter Brewing to create a light, refreshing Saison made with golden base malt and hard red wheat, then fermented with Transmitter's house yeast. A touch of red currant was blended with Kviek yeast to leave this beer with a slightly tart, dry finish. So let's see what we have here. If this was on the label, we would say that it was a collaboration beer, which means we've got the two breweries working, which is going to be an interesting flavor because each brewery has its own flavor profile. Made with golden base malt. So this would be to me very much like a lager style color and hard red wheat. Now I'm not too sure if the red would add any color to it, but I don't think so. I think that the wheat is more giving it a bite. And fermented with their house yeast. A touch of red currant. Okay, we have a red beer here. Was blended with Kviek yeast to leave this beer with a slight tart, dry finish. Kviek, if I'm not mistaken, is a special type of fermented beer yeast. Mainly, if I remember, and I would have to look this up, I believe it is Russian or Croatian or something along that line. Okay, so what are we expecting? A light bodied beer with a light color, a little bit of a bite from the wheat, and a red tinge to it, a little red color to it. And with the Kviek yeast, I'm imagining that it with a slightly funky flavor. And it says a tart, dry finish, so we will find out if it meets expectations. Let's crack this open. These are 32 ounces, and so it's kind of a large tasting vessel, if I may say so. All right. Well, I don't see any other color than a color that I would expect from a lager beer. It is a little hazy. It's very effervescent. It holds a nice head. The foam on top is really rather nice. There is definitely a sour, it's not quite a sour, it's a little funky flavor to it. Not quite barnyard, but it is rustic. I was expecting a little bit more head on this, but and a little more body for what it is. However, for all of the talk, for all of the information that I've been able to get from these guys, this does meet expectations, certainly. In fact, yes, I would say R2-D2 Farmhouse Ale from our friends. It's a farm ale Saison from the Randolph Brewing Company meets expectations. Ah, the Old Growler, wishing all of you that your beers meet expectations. Ah. All right. I would really appreciate it if those of you who enjoyed this would, first of all, subscribe, and that way you'll know every time the Old Growler comes on, and you won't miss any of the Old Growler's tastings. And if you give a thumbs up, I'd truly appreciate it. And if you ring the alarm bell down there or the alert bell, that way you won't miss any of the Old Growlers, that's for sure. Thank you very much for watching, and I do appreciate it. For the rest of you who are still here, I'm going to be talking about uh, bars and how important they are. Now, first of all, I've been covering the beer industry for almost 40 years. Yeah. And been the author of Beer Basics and Cooking and Eating with Beer, both published by John Wiley back in the 90s. But they tell me they're still available on eBay or wherever people buy books these days. Because of all of that background, I've had a chance to go to a lot of bars. And I came to New York City in 1976. And that was at the height of, I believe, the bar scene was beginning. That whole First Avenue, Columbus Avenue strip, TGI Fridays. Well, actually, it was Dangerfield's anchored it on the Manhattan, on the west side, on the east side, going all the way up to 59th Street practically. So it was quite an exciting time for bars. And so I've seen and been in probably. I'm just going to throw a number up, at least 1,000 bars for sure. No doubt about it. That doesn't count restaurants and taverns and watering holes and suds buckets and roadside taverns and any of those other things. But what I have discovered about them, and it is not a surprise to anybody, that it is a place where people congregate to be together, simply to be with other people. And this is important in not only urban areas, but also rural areas and suburban areas. It's a place to find out that there's just more than you, and it's a place to relax. Beverage alcohol has always been a way to relax, and sometimes a chance to meet other people. That's one of the fun things about bars. There is a friend of mine who's an artist, Bob Sanandella. He heads up the art school, the Art Students League in New York City, and they made a movie about him. And what he was saying in it, they made one comment about bars, and he said, well, his wife Liz doesn't like him hanging out in bars as much because it's not artistic and this type of thing or whatever it was. And he said but his answer was quite simple. He said that bars are one-act plays, and it's true. That's what it is in our lives. And most of the time they bind us together. After 9/11 and after Sandy and the other tragedies, the bars and taverns and restaurants in particular were very much a part of our lives. It was a rallying place. And the fact that we're told not to rally there now is against, it's just not human nature. And so it is very difficult. And I'm sure that you folks can understand that having been in that position of being in that profession, it is certainly disconcerting. Let's look back at the influence of bars. I'd like to look back to Prohibition when they were supposed to be closed down. Think about this. And this was a particular war, a political war from rural against cities. There were these cities, Chicago, New York, for an extent, Philadelphia, many of these large booming cities, Boston for sure, had massive immigrant communities. And rural America was not too particularly fond of foreigners or outsiders of any kind. And radio had found its heyday, or it had begun, and it was catching on like fire around the country. Everyone had a radio receiver, triode tubes. I mean, it was they were old-fashioned, but they worked, and it was one of the first mass communication devices. Newspapers, yes, but they were local. This was a way to reach an entire nation or an entire area of the United States, particularly the Midwest. Billy Sunday started preaching against booze. And of course, it caught like fire. And the rebellion was, again, it's not only so much that booze was a sin, but it was part of what foreigners did, what they did, those people. This sounds familiar, huh? And so Prohibition took place. Well, as Hirschfeld says in his book, which studies the bars of Manhattan during Prohibition, and Pete Hamill wrote the preview, the beginning of the book, the preview. And anyway, what he said was there was something along maybe 1,000 pubs, bars, and restaurants on Manhattan Island before Prohibition. During Prohibition, there were 5,000 operating. Now, if Prohibition was supposed to stop booze, it didn't do a very good job of it. Okay, you try and close down people's bars, they're going to say, ha ha. In fact, in the book, he says that it was almost considered a national responsibility for urban people to drink. It came to that much of a polarization. Sound familiar? One of the other interesting things is that in the speakeasies, particularly up in Harlem, where it was a major black community, a thriving black community, black and white people were mixing in speakeasies. They were talking and dancing together. As one of the pastors who ran, I'm not too sure the name of the Harlem newspaper, which was a religious newspaper, he said it was the best thing that happened to integration ever. So you close down people's bars, their lives are going to change one way or another. And we go back even further. Go back to the 1860s, before the Civil War. Again, immigrants, and I'm talking urban areas, particularly New York City, the German beer gardens. Oh, if you think that some of the rest of the restaurants and casinos today are fantastic, some of the beer gardens, the beer garden down on Union, I believe it was near Union Square, it covered almost 8 acres, and it was 4 stories high, and it had all kinds of things that went on. Down in the bottom, it was a garden, and people would come with families on Saturdays and Sunday nights, and they would have dinners together. It was wide open. They had shooting galleries on the 2nd floor. They had concerts, small chamber musics, everywhere you could go. It was part of their society. It was part of the way they lived. The Irish, the same thing. They had the neighborhood places where you could kick back, men and women together. It was not as grand, but it was certainly as part of their society. Even down in the Six Corners, which was the nastiest part of the city. The bartenders, they usually ran with Tammany Hall, but they also were the people that ran what was going on, who got jobs, where would you, how could you get in touch with your folks back in Ireland? Did you need some help? Do you need a place to stay? That was what bartenders did. That was what bars were for. The priest would go in there, they'd sit there and they'd write letters home to the families in Ireland. That was letter writers. It was all part of the bar. It was so much a part of the society. And finally, I'd like to close with the fact that you go back to New Amsterdam. When the bottom of Manhattan, the tip of Manhattan Island, the very tip of it was colonized by the Dutch. And I mean, there are maybe 200 buildings altogether, and that counts all the docks and everything else. Well, a Jesuit missionary wrote home to his house, and he said he was aghast at this New Amsterdam. There were 200 buildings, and all of them either had a brewery or were selling beer or spirits. It was terrible. And even worse, there were over 200 languages spoken. 200 languages spoken. And they all got along in those pubs and bars. They all got along drinking beer. Well, there was fights, of course, but everybody has to drink beer, especially when you're in that situation. Sailors, ho, 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 my word. And rum, oh, and what can you do with beer? You can distill it. That's what you can do. And of course, that was being done by the good sturdy Dutch. So even back then, pubs and bars and taverns were part of human existence. Now, what's going to happen next here, now, in 2020, the next 4 or 5 months, July, August? Things will go slowly, tentatively, in some places. Others will open wide open. But I can guarantee you that bars and taverns will never go out of existence. They're part of what we are. They're part of our society. You don't have to drink to be in a bar, no, if you don't want to. But you want to be there because you're with people. And that is the way the human being is. So here's a cheer to bars. And I want to thank all of you for hanging out and listening to my talk about being a professional barfly and having a tasting with the Old Growler. Greetings, Dave. Good to see you. Thanks very much. Well, I'll see you next time, which will be the 17th Wednesday of June, hopefully. And until then, stay with it.